Welcome to the Veterans Impact Show, where our motto is Charlie Mike. Continue the mission. I'm your host, Jim Blythe, U.S. Navy Vietnam veteran and certified senior advisor. Join me as we feature veterans who continue the mission of leadership and commitment in our communities after serving our great nation. Why, you never know who you're going to meet or where we're going to go. So welcome aboard. Hey, what a great day. We're here in the studio, going to be talking about overcoming trauma together. Now, real quick, I want to say a special thank you to the DBTV network for putting us on Amazon Fire and Roku. We're going to have another great announcement in a week or so. I think we're going to be on a TV cable, and that's going to be great. And we are also on the AUN network out in Northern California. We appreciate those folks, and I appreciate the emails and calls. So you can email us, messenger us through Facebook, YouTube. We're here for you, and thank you very much. And this is brought to you by my company, Fairway Independent Mortgage, that I work for. My MLS number is 311548, and the corporate one's 2289. I do senior care lending. I'm a specialist in consulting. I'm a CSA for seniors. I work strictly with seniors throughout 6 states. So we're here for you with Fairway. Fairway also has the American Warrior Initiative. We have provided over $1 million worth of money on service dogs that have been given away. So take a look at Fairway. We're a company here for you as well. Now, I want to introduce Lieutenant Colonel Ginger Simonson. Now, Ginger and I met in about 2015 when I first started broadcasting, and she came on my program. And I was like, holy cow. Then she said, hey, we're going to have this military peer network, and we're going to be training people for the military peer network. And I said, well, I want to do that. So I spent a Saturday with you, Ginger, and with Scott Smith. And I was like blown away at the training that we did, and that we became closer and closer friends, you and your husband, Cy, and Diane and I. And you've come on a program with me many times to talk about many of the things that have to do with veterans benefits, have to do with the military peer network, have to do with your legislative initiatives that you worked with the Texas legislature. So you are an amazing person when it comes to being a peer support specialist, an amazing advocate for veterans, and just an amazing teacher. So I want to say a special thank you. Welcome aboard. And Ginger, let's talk about overcoming trauma together. Moral injury, PTS, physical injury. Let's talk about healing. And you started a program that's basically called Reboot. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Jim, please don't give me that much credit. So I did not come up with the idea of Reboot. Reboot was put together by a couple in Kentucky who were asked to help returning service members whose unit experienced a lot of suicides. And they were Jenny Evans, and right now I can't think of the handsome dude, as he calls himself, but they founded Reboot Combat Recovery. Evan,
okay.
Evan and Jenny, that's right. And basically, they found that if you are a moral person and you go into a situation where you have to do things that are against your morality, against your faith traditions, against your personal sense of right and wrong, you may just have to struggle internally until you figure out how to process that, how to, put together, how can I, as a soldier, kill innocent people? And of course, soldiers don't go out there to kill innocent people, but on a battlefield where the enemy often blends in with everyday citizens and everyday marketplaces, anybody can become, unfortunately, a target because they are a threat.
I think this is especially important because it's not just military.
That's right.
This is something that's universal. So this couple wrote this reboot. There were one for combat, one for first responders, and one for everybody. And when you think about injury or moral injury, you're thinking about stepping on the IED, stepping on, being in a foxhole when we're thinking about that in the military, or being in a traumatic automobile accident, or being in a traumatic marriage, or being in a traumatic family with abuse. There is throughout our society and culture worldwide abuses, insults. Instead of a spoonful of sugar, it's a spoonful of poison. The little boy that hears he's not good enough, the little girl that hears you're not very pretty, you're just trash, the child who the teacher belittles, the child who the people in the school bully, the wounded fish syndrome, the child who's from a very poor family and finding herself always ridiculed. All of these things start creating mindsets and start creating problems that can be just as big as if I was in a foxhole and got my leg blown off and my best buddy got his head shot off. Or if I was in an aircraft that got shot down and I was a POW. Those kind of events are gigantic. Being in a war zone, which I was in Vietnam on aircraft carriers, that's considered one of the most dangerous duties in the world. And especially since I volunteered and went up and worked on the flight deck. You were in Iraq. Is that true?
I did spend time in Iraq.
And you were also in Greece.
I was in Greece, which was a great assignment as far as beauty, food, the Greek people. But unfortunately, they also had a problem with a terrorist group, 17 November. And they hunted us down because we were Americans, purely because we are American soldiers. And they resented us for, incidents that had happened in their past with a military coup by their government, a junta that they felt we supported as our government. And so they wanted us out of their country. And basically, it was okay to kill us because they could demonize us.
Yeah.
And basically, it wasn't until a European officer, actually a British general by the name of Stephen Saunders, was assassinated by 17 November, that the Greek people and the Greek government decided it was time to act against these terrorists. And so, that can cause some moral injury. You go to help a nation, and you find that there's a segment, and it was a very small segment, I have to say, because the majority of Greek people, the Greek army that I worked with, they treated me fabulously. But that sense that, just because of who I am, somebody would like to kill me or hurt me.
We found that, for instance, when we home ported in the Philippines, there were the Hucks that were the communists. And one of my helicopters went over to Manila to take some people over there. And then when that thing came back, we found about 150 bullet holes in the bottom of the aircraft. We were told all the time, don't go here, don't go there, stay in groups of 2 or 3, because there are people out there that want to kill you. The same thing in everywhere we went, there was always that undercurrent. But we've also got that in the civilian world. We've also got that 95 or 90% of the military doesn't go in harm's way. They're in technical jobs, they're in support jobs, they're in fabulous jobs that are contributing to those of us who are in the battlefield. The vast majority have their own sets of things that happen to them from starting in boot camp. So you're right. First of all, in boot camp, we went to the rifle range. We were driven to learn because we were being prepared for battle, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. In the civilian world, who prepares you for battle?
Well, it depends on what your profession is. let's say you're a nurse or a doctor. You're prepared. You come to the battlefield with all your upbringing, your moral values, your faith-based traditions, and then you bring to the battle your schooling, your specialized schooling, and you get to a place like, let's say, the emergency room, or let's just say any hospital during COVID, and you're forced to make life and death decisions, you know, and the power to help somebody live or die is in your hands. And if you feel like you don't handle that adequately, and it upsets your personal sense of self, where you believe, I should have done this, but I didn't. I should have saved them. I should have been able to get a ventilator, but I couldn't because there wasn't another one. These types of things, you know, you are prepared to save lives, but you're not really prepared to deal with the deaths or the injuries that might come from your sense of right or wrong, from your moral tradition, your moral compass.
Absolutely. And I want to throw a controversial thing because, for instance, Vietnam, we were going to war, and really that was the first war that they didn't attack us or they didn't attack our allies. Basically, and I want to think about it for a minute, Korea, the Chinese were, and North Koreans were invading South Korea. Excuse me. Vietnam was a different thing. We came away from Vietnam. Not only did we not get support from our own countrymen, from our own people, I got spat on. I got called names when I got back. A lot of people did. All of a sudden, you're going, wait a minute. I went to war to try and do X and Y, but this wasn't right. And, I think there's within the medical profession, what we have learned is there were medications, ivermectin, and some other medications that could have been taken and were taken in other countries, and they prevented COVID. They did things. So if a medical professional, and I had people die, and all of a sudden I find out you could have given them an alternative without having to use a ventilator and would have saved their lives, I'd be really upset at the leadership. Well, I believe a lot of people believe that has happened, and I'm sure that's a controversial thing, but the same thing happened in Vietnam. I think the same thing happened in Iraq. I think the same thing happened in Afghanistan.
So, Jim, I guess you've hit on something that is very important and very central to moral injury, and that is it's very subjective. So it depends on your personal worldview. If you believe a certain thing and something shatters your belief system, then you're gonna may have to deal with moral injury. But it's really about perspective. Let's talk, if we can, a little bit about what was going on in the beginning of the Vietnam War. The very beginnings. America started to really go into upheaval, and it was a time of civil rights issues. It was a time of women's rights issues. It was a time of moral issues that became related to Vietnam. Why are we sending our young men and actually young women, especially nurses, why are we sending them to a foreign country to bail out the French in Indochina? That was, not really a big thing in the beginning, because we have a history that we're the good guys, right? We go in to help people.
Yeah, that's what we want to do. And yet, in many instances, I think people came away with like, we didn't help anybody. We hurt them. And a lot of people felt that. Other people did have very different views. But again, all of this all together, you begin to get a sense of betrayal.
That's right. Again, it's based on your perspective, what you're looking at. So let's just take, if you want to be controversial, let's take an African American soldier perhaps raised in Mississippi, who tries to leave the poverty of Mississippi and joins the military, I said, isn't drafted, and makes it through basic training, which is integrated, but it's still very hostile for an African-American person, especially if there are other people with a different set of cultures and backgrounds. And that African-American, goes over, fights in Vietnam, and he gets close to his brothers because every day they have to cover each other's backs.
Mm-hmm.
They have to survive based on trust. And, it's a beautiful thing that the military can basically bring people from every single background together, every single religion, every single perspective, and build a bond that is so powerful. It's even more powerful than some family bonds. And then this same African American comes back to America and is not only spit on and called a baby killer, but as they move back to Jim Crow South, think about what happens to that African American soldier who has fought for his country.
Well, and the best example of that is the Tuskegee Airmen. And I think, now we honor Tuskegee Airmen. Back then, those guys came back and had no place to go. They had nothing. And so, yes, we have that. And in every level of our culture and society, you're going to find these types of things. It's not just race. I mean, think about the Native American Indians and what all happened to them. And a lot of them were discriminated against until they found out that they could use code talkers. Navajo made a difference. We now honor the code talkers. For a long time, there's no Indian, but a good Indian, but it's a dead Indian. And that was a horrible, horrible, horrible mindset. That affected them, but it also affected us because it's demonizing people. So as we continue this conversation about trauma and healing and reboot, we're going to give you some tools. We're going to introduce you to some opportunities to be able to change this whole perspective and change this complete framework to help you and to heal. Now, this is Jim Blythe with Lieutenant Colonel Ginger Simonson, my great friend. We're talking about reboot trauma. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Veterans Impact Show. And thanks to our sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage and Lone Star Wealth Strategies. Now, let's continue this great conversation. Hey, I'm learning myself. I'm going through the reboot trauma with Ginger, who's my instructor. Besides that, she's like my sister. We've become such great friends, and that's important. So I want to recommend that go take a look at Evan and Jerry Owens' Reboot Trauma. There's several versions of it, and you can go to, what is it, reboottrauma.org or .com? Rebootrecovery.com. Thank you, Diane, for correcting me. Reboot Recovery. She's going to put it up. It's important, and it's an opportunity. Change your life. Change your perspective. Change your opportunity. And here is a plan by looking at a great program to change your perspective about life. Now, one of the big things with this Reboot Trauma program, there are other programs out there. This has been endorsed by the VA. Is that correct? I believe you said that.
The VA, the Veterans Administration, provided a grant, the Josh Fox grant, to Reboot because they believed, and it's been shown through empirical evidence, that this program, this 12-week training program, can help anybody overcome the traumas and reconcile these very difficult conflicts in their soul through a faith-based program that allows you to examine where your traumas start and then how they might become a moral injury, and then how you can heal from that moral injury. So it makes sense because if you don't heal and your moral injury becomes so overpowering, suicide actually can become an option for you.
We have an epidemic of suicide right now in the United States. And we talk about in the military community how many a day are committing suicide and why? Because they're hopeless. They feel like there's no end. Again, it's a battlefield of the mind. I love Joyce Meyer and her book, Battlefield of the Mind. And that's what we're talking about. And here's a tool to help us. I tell you what, I need a tool to get rid of all these allergies. Maybe I'll start wearing an oxygen mask to try and help myself out. Okay, in talking about this, how can moral injury affect our lives? Anger, welcome to the freeway, man. And some guy cuts you off or some guy goes blowing by you doing 130 miles an hour on a motorcycle and scares the daylights out of you. Somebody at work makes a joke and you feel like it's intended for you. All of a sudden, there are so many things that start creating what I call unreasonable anger. All kinds of things. Failed marriages, failed businesses, failed relationships in businesses, being fired from a job because you're a malcontent. Why? Where is it coming from? And I'm beginning to realize it came from this. So let's talk about how we can go about changing our lives, because moral injury, whether we realize it or not, affects our life.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit deeply about trauma first.
Okay.
And trauma basically is an injury. Now, whether it affects us, for more than a little while, a broken leg, it can be traumatic. A car accident can be traumatic. But
okay, but if you don't set a broken leg right, you could be crippled the rest of your life.
That's right. And that's where, a trauma or a morally injurious event can actually cause you again to start to have manifestations of the turmoil that's going on inside your head and inside your soul. So let's just take infidelity, for example, because that's sadly a very common thing in our country. It is a betrayal at the deepest level. It's a betrayal of a promise, an oath. It's a betrayal from many of their faith traditions. It is such a deep betrayal. How can you possibly process that? And the bad news is many people find coping mechanisms that are not very helpful. They're maladaptive, basically. Very common ones are drug addictions, alcoholism, gambling, speeding, pornography. You can, for every trauma, for every moral injury, you can find a maladaptive way of dealing with it. But each one of us, if we want to become better people, if we want to become better citizens, I think it's incumbent on us to take a deeper look at what is causing these symptoms. For me personally, my major symptom of moral injury was rage. And it's an interesting concept because it didn't start because of the military and it didn't end with the military. It actually started with my childhood. And I had some morally injurious events in my childhood. I did not have the capacity to really process them and understand them, but they helped to shape how I grew up, how I saw the world. They helped actually to lead me to the military. They helped me want to be a defender. I wanted to make sure there were no more victims out there. So I became somebody who wanted to defend. My faith-based roots are in the Catholic faith, which is all about, believe it or not, social activism. Jesus Christ was a revolutionary, and he was a social activist. He tore up, the Hebrew world in his day by wanting to feed the poor. He wanted us to forgive our enemies. Think about that as the basis of our healing.
I've got some really great friends, Tony and Bruce Hebel, who've written Forgiving Forward, program I've been through. And when we come back, I want to talk more about Forgiving Forward, and I'll tell you a story that is truly amazing that I watched and experienced the magnanimous, unbelievable change in a great, great person as a result of forgiving. So this is the Veterans Impact Show. I'm Jim Blythe, and this is Ginger Simonson. We're veterans, we're Americans, and we're here for you. Welcome back to the Veterans Impact Show. And thanks to our sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage and Lone Star Wealth Strategies. Now, let's continue this great conversation. Okay, this is Jim Blythe and Ginger Simonson. If you've just joined us, we're talking about Trauma Reboot. We're talking about, and Diane is posting up the website where you need to go to. And that is a great place to get started. Why are we focusing on this? Well, we've got a high level of suicide. We've got anger. We've got all kinds of things going on in this nation. Right now, we're a nation divided.
Yes, we are.
And people are very, very, very angry. They're angry about inflation. They're angry about the government. They're angry about the lack of social consciousness. They're activists. They're doing this. They're doing that. Everybody's angry, and they have learned if I get angry and I scream loud enough, the squeaking wheel gets greased. That's not smart, and that's not good. We're not working together. So the result of that is we're tearing ourselves apart, and everybody, I think, is affected by that, from the smallest child to the oldest person out there. Yes, ma'am.
I mentioned my worldview first as a Catholic, and I am a strong Christian. But now I'd like to just talk about my worldview as a soldier and the training I received. I know that I have ethical values that were further developed in the military, loyalty, duty to country. And I also know that my training at basic training and at anti-terrorism school was designed to make me be able to be mad enough to kill somebody if I had to. So in old days, the way to get somebody to agree to kill someone was to demonize that enemy, whether you were a Greek and you were an Athenian fighting the Spartans, if you were a Roman conquering a country, you had to demonize who were your enemies. Because how can we, as human, presumably moral beings, how can we kill another human being? Well, it's really difficult, it turns out, unless you're a sociopath or a psychopath. And thank God there aren't as many as those in our country as there are good people. So bottom line is, military experience showed me, my military training history showed me that you have to demonize the enemy in order to be able to kill them. What we're doing in this country now is we're demonizing each other.
Yes.
I mean, even within our own family, we're allowing our political views, our religious views, our social views, our ideas about gender, we're allowing our worldview to get so deeply ingrained that we want to find an enemy. And you know what? I'm going to talk again as a soldier. This is the most dangerous thing that can happen to America when we turn against each other. Because I am a student of history, and I know the Chinese civilization goes back 5,000 years. and they are watching us intently, and they are learning what we're doing, and they are using the tools of the military, tools like deception, tools like misinformation, and we're allowing them to get between our own brothers and sisters, the citizens of this country who may not look like us, who may not believe what we believe, but we are Americans. And we're allowing these schisms in our society. That's a very dangerous, volatile situation. And we've got to find a way for national healing, national reconciliation. And I don't know how we do that except in these small groups with my brothers, my sisters. And guess what? In our Reboot group that we're starting next week, we have civilians.
You bet. Now, and again, this is so terribly important because I don't want to be in anger management control all the time. Maybe I'm not stating that, but all you got to do is drive on the freeway and it'll drive you nuts. And even in everything we look at. Now, you talk about demonizing and making it acceptable to kill. One of the things we've done is started with our movies and, adventure, more adventure, more adventure. Now you can hardly find a movie that less than 50 people are being blown away. And it's so dramatic when they're killed. Also, these video games, I didn't know till I talked to a friend of mine who came back from the military, and he worked for a company here in Dallas, and they developed video games to be able to train soldiers in combat. What? I talked to a guy who was a Marine in Vietnam, and we were talking about our boot camp training. And he said, well, one of the things we did was we went charging up a hill facing a machine gun that was shooting at us. And we were carrying our rifles, and we all had blanks, and everybody was shooting blanks. But we were screaming and yelling. We were charging that hill, and we took the hill. He said, if there had been one live bullet in anybody's gun, it would have killed a bunch of people because it was set up to train us to be lethal. Stuck in our mind. That enabled us to go to Vietnam and do that. Yet right now, today, we're sitting there watching television, watching movies, watching Facebook Reels, watching things that are accentuating this dangerous behavior that we want to go out and kill somebody. Or everybody's against me. Everybody hates me. Nobody loves me. I think I'll go eat some worms. Funny old saying, but it gets into the mind.
Yeah, so you brought up another good point. So first you have to have some demonization, and then you have to have desensitization. And that's what movies can do. Perhaps that's what social media and those algorithms that continue to drive, the bad things you look at to you. If you look at bad things, I have a friend, he called it doom scrolling. Then you get more bad things and more bad things.
Right.
And pretty soon, you're not looking at somebody as an American. You're looking at them as an evil infidel that you need to kill. So how do we get past that, Jim? We need to get past that. And, I have to rely on my faith tradition, but, there are so many people that have some type of moral, spiritual, or faith tradition. And, doing a reboot is basically looking again at why do you have these feelings? Why are you hating somebody? Why are you angry with somebody? Where did this all come from? And then, as you said, start to figure it out. How can I be a calmer person? How can I maintain, a level of decorum? How do I maintain a level of self-control? You're right. We've got to go back to the beginning and essentially rewire our brains or rewire how we look at the world. We've got to fix our worldview. I mean, let's go back to when we cared about each other. And did that ever exist in America? Some people might say it never did, because did we ever care about everybody else?
No,
Why?
but we're getting to a point in world history of communications, all of these things coming together. We're changing the world. Do you want to change the world in a positive way, or do you want it to erupt into argumentum where we're killing everybody? That that is my point also. And I want to back up and say it's not just a military. This is a spoonful of poison that has been fed to all of us day in and day out, hour in, hour out. And these spoonfuls of poison are tearing us apart and bringing this country further and further apart. Where if you're a this or you're a that, no, we've all got to come together. My grandfather used to say, and I loved it because he had some Cherokee Indian heritage, and he said, "Never judge a man till you walk in his moccasins." Whoa, think about that for a minute before you react. So a lot of this is also creating a situation what I call getting away from the wounded fish syndrome. Now, if you want to catch a fish, you want to go fishing, catch fish, you put a bait in the water that acts like a wounded fish. And boy, even if the fish aren't hungry, they'll attack it and they'll get hooked, they'll get caught. The same thing happens on the playground. You got the kid who maybe come from a disadvantaged situation, a kid who is more sensitive, a kid who's had issues at home. That kid gives off a vibe and the other kids start picking on him. It happens all the time. It's human nature. It happens. How do we deal with that? How do we stop that? How do we recognize in ourselves that we're participating in that? But how do we recognize that we have been a victim of that? Because guess what? I don't care who you are. We all have been a victim of that.
Yeah, that's a great thing to think about. Because moral injury can involve something that you do to somebody else, where you're the perpetrator. It can involve something that is done to you, where you are, I hate to say the victim, because I believe the term is survivor. And then there's another last thing where you witness atrocities, horrific events that hurt other people or kill other people. So you have those, three different experiences of moral injury. And sometimes, one is more pervasive than the other. And I'll give, a couple of examples, perpetrators. That's when, you're a soldier, you go to do a noble thing, you think, and let's make it a Marine. The Marines seem to suffer from this more, based on my work with fellow veterans. But you get on the battlefield and you're forced really to kill a child. Why? Because they got a grenade launcher pointed at you, or they've got a suicide vest on, and they are walking closer and closer to your squad. What's your choice? Kill that kid, or save your brothers and sisters who are right
And
beside
yourself.
you? Well, I guess yourself. Service to above self is one of the things that's been inculcated in me since I was a child. Whether it was my religious view, later my military view, but service above self is what drives me. And so on that playground you talked about where somebody's being bullied, I want to be the one who jumps at that person who's the bully and stop it. So how does something good, where you want to do a good thing and protect the underdog, if you will, how can that turn into something really bad? It did for me. And basically how it did that was, watching institutional trauma, institutional issues, in the military, women can be sexually assaulted by fellow soldiers, fellow service members, and so can men. It doesn't happen to everybody, but it does happen. And that's bad enough. A rape in society, a rape in the military, a rape at college, a rape in church is bad enough. But what's worse is when there's nobody in your support system, your family, your tight knit group who's going to support you. because, oh my goodness, now there's a threat. What if this gets in the papers? What if this messes up my promotion? Here's where service above self can be forgotten. And when that happens to somebody, when you are betrayed by those who are so close to you, that is something devastating. And to watch that, to see maybe the Veterans Administration, that is a great organization and provides the best health care in the country. I mean, their standards are up against any hospital in this country, but there are incidents where they screw up because guess what? There's humans that work there. There's veterans that work where?
It happens in every walk of life.
That's right. But the point is, for me, this kind of institutional stuff, my country. When we went to Iraq, I was, I think I might have been a lieutenant colonel by then. I was furious that we were going into Iraq. We had to go into Afghanistan. That's where the threat, evolved from. That's where Osama bin Laden was with the Taliban. That's where the plot was hatched to drive those planes into the Twin Towers, into the Pentagon. And, thank God, not into Congress and instead into a field in Pennsylvania. Those things boiled up in me, and they started to affect my everyday life. If I perceived that, let's say in a veterans treatment court, that somebody prevented a deserving veteran with an honorable discharge and just a DWI prevented that person from getting into veterans treatment court where they could address their issues and overcome their trauma, their PTSD. That started to just boil up in me. And I came to a point where it just was too much for me to deal with the world. I had to pull back. I had to isolate, which is a very big symptom of moral injury. I did not feel like I could interact with other people because I was afraid that that beast inside of me, that rage inside of me would come out and do something that would be bad for everybody.
When we get threatened, the beast comes out. When we're in a situation, whether it's our home, our family, whatever, our work, when you're at home and you feel threatened by your spouse, or you feel, things aren't going right, or what you bring home from the office, or what you bring from your childhood. I got to tell you, I have had 3 failed marriages, and I look back and it was my fault. I was there every case. I made terrible mistakes. I wish I could go back and change all of that. I'm trying right now to reboot. I'm trying to do better and be better. Stick with us. We've got a lot more to cover in this last segment as we bring it in. Thank you for being part of the Veterans Impact Show. We're right back. Welcome back to the Veterans Impact Show. And thanks to our sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage and Lone Star Wealth Strategies. Now, let's continue this great conversation. My goal is to make awareness and bring this nation back together, to be part of a revival where we don't look at people as less than or demonize or this or that, but we start working together and communicating. We start trying to solve problems instead of make problems. And that's what's going on right now. And I think a lot of that has to do with our media, our press, our communications, but it's also human nature, and they're buying into that. So I brought in Ginger Simonson. We're talking about Reboot Trauma. This is the book. You can see it. I think Nathaniel's going to put that up to where you can see it. It's a course that I'm doing to learn and to change some of my attitudes. And thank you, Ginger, for bringing this to my attention. And thank you for teaching it. And thank you for the people that are participating to help me to do better. Now, if you go check on Reboot, trauma, you're going to find that there are groups all over the nation. There's a website, there's places where you can go to learn. And it's not just about those of us in the military, it's across the board, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There is a combat reboot, and I did 2 rounds of that a number of years ago. And you mentioned also there's one for first responders. But recognizing that trauma exists wherever humans exist, these great folks, Evan and Jenny Owens, decided, well, let's start trying to heal across the board. And so let's also give an opportunity for folks in the military, for us veterans who really, have tried to come to terms with our own moral injury, to share what we know with our community members, because it is very important that, we all understand each other. You mentioned some percentages a while back, and, all in all, only about 10% of the people in this country have worn a uniform. 90
Less than that, I think.
Well, it's actually right now living 7.4%, but, and the rest of the country has not really fully carried that burden of war, that cost of war. And we bear that cost, but we also, as military people and as veterans, we're driven to be better. That is part of my ethos as a soldier.
Mm-hmm.
Employ your lessons learned, get better for the next engagement. And so basically, we want to share what we learned in our communities, because guess what? Sometimes when we come back, and we try to rejoin our communities, rejoin the civilian world, we really feel like fish out of water, to use the fish metaphor a little bit more. And so we actually can't find full healing. I can't find full healing until I'm able to go back into the civilian spaces where I first started, manifesting the symptoms of my moral injury. I need to go back and I need to interact in my community. And they need to, understand, I think, that they have trauma too. And to start to, maybe humanize me as a person, as a soldier, so they can also humanize other people outside their more specific spheres, their individual cliques.
One of the things I think is veterans have and can continue to lead the way in reconciliation and revival. And it doesn't mean just necessarily one faith or another revival. I'm talking about revival of pulling together in this nation. So, Ginger, this has been an amazing conversation that we've had. Again, Trauma Reboot, look it up. It's a tremendous program. There are other programs out there. I love Joyce Myers, her Battlefield of the Mind, Robert Morris, his books, you name it. There are trainings out there that you can change. You can get away from some of the anger management. You can get away from the moral injury management. You can get away from the self-medication of alcohol, drugs, pornography, you name it, because we can be all we can be. Jeremiah 29 says, basically, the plans I have for you are for you to prosper and be great. We need to understand that we've got the capability to be great. We can do away with all of those traumas, all of those spoonfuls of poison, as well as that blast that affected us in our life, whether it was a divorce in our family, whether it was a person dying, it was an automobile accident that created trauma. We can get over that. We can learn to go forward. It's not about where we've been, it's where we're going. We don't want to do away with history. We want to learn from history so we can go forward. Well, Ginger, one of the things that I do is I say real quick, if you're going to say something to a young man or a young woman who's graduating from high school or college, would you tell them to go into the military?
I would. It was my greatest honor to serve my country. My army wasn't perfect. My country isn't perfect, but I met so many people in my travels around the world, and even in Iraq, in Greece. I have learned and I have grown, and I am on a mission to continue to do whatever good I did in the past to become a better person so that I am more effective in the future. So yes, the military can transform your life and
All right.
your vision.
I'm cutting you off because I got to tell everybody real quick. Mark Liebman, a Vietnam SAR rescue pilot, is going to be here to talk about his books, but talk about what he did in life after the military, a retired Navy captain. I want to say a quick prayer. Dear Lord God, we thank you for bringing this nation together. We thank you for the hedge of protection around our active duty military, around our first responders, those of us who have run into the fire instead of away from it. Dear God, help us to lead revival. Help us to change. Help us to reboot. Help us to bring this nation together. One nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. And again, I apologize. I'll figure out some way to get rid of the congestion. Have a great day. This is the Veterans Impact Show.